What is your favorite conspiracy theory? Story 1, I like the dead internet conspiracy. Long story short is that most interaction on the internet is now just you talking to bots, being served by bots, reading crappy bot-written articles, and bots posting crappy questions on r askreddit, like this one. I think what makes the dead internet conspiracy theory fun is that it is at least partially true. It isn't to the extreme that the theory presents itself. And I don't think Google has some super secret AI, but a lot of content is certainly bullcrap bots. Story 2, human cloning has advanced and is in use. Dolly happened, was huge news, and then not much cloning news after that. The whole world, every country was like, nah, we're good here. We did a sheep. Doubt. One fact, cloning your pets is actually more common than you think nowadays. There's a lady on the Clock app who cloned her cat and now has her new generation clone of her now deceased cat. Freaky. Story 3. All of the genealogy websites are a government program, and the real purpose is to have a database for solving crimes. They knew that there would be no way to have people willingly give over their DNA for that purpose, so they used genealogy as the motivation for people to give up the goods. We also paid for it, so it's a double win for the government. Story 4. That we've had cars able to run off of alternate fuel sources for decades, but at every turn, progress was stopped by oil and gas companies. Chrysler had the turbine car in the early 60s that would run off of anything that burned. Chevy was experimenting with electric cars with the Electrovair in the mid-60s, which had a range of 80 miles. GM had the EV1 in the 90s. We should be decades ahead of where we are now. Story 5. Charles Manson was introduced to LSD in a federal prison in Chicago as part of MKUltra. When he moved to San Francisco, he kept in touch with the same parole officer and checked in regularly at the free clinic at Haight and Ashbury, where he brought the girls to get treated for STDs and re-up his acid supply. That clinic was the perfect storm of several different individuals and programs. CIA as an organization involved with the free clinic as a way of keeping tabs on the counterculture movement. The actual CIA field agents who loved the benefits of hippie culture, like free love and free girls. And the medical, psychiatric true believers who really thought LSD was going to change the world. They thought Manson was a perfect example of a violent criminal who had been successfully converted to peace and love through modern medicine. Manson, for his part, was just a con man who realized he could fast talk these college squares and keep himself in the good graces of the law and free LSD. He could attract girls with a combination of bad boy charm, free drugs, prison-taught pimping, and the co-opting of new age language and goodwill. When the drugs dried up, he started trading girls for to the bikers, got more into amphetamines than LSD, and it all started going to hell. Great book about it, Chaos, by Tom O'Neill. Story 6. The Titanic has a few good ones. There were conflicting accounts of how it fell apart in the ocean, how it was actually a whole different ship that went to sea than what the White Star Line company was originally planning it to be. My favorite conspiracy theory about the Titanic is that when the command hard a starboard was given, the helmsman, who started his career in sailing ships, turned right instead of left. Starboard, after all, means right. By the time the error was realized and the ship began to turn left, it was too late. The only crew members who knew about the initial error and survived kept it a secret throughout the inquest. The story only came to light in 2010, when the granddaughter of one of the crew members came forward to confess to what he'd told the family about what really happened. If the ship had turned left instead, right to begin with, it easily would have avoided the iceberg. Story 7. Prince King Charles is a prolific prank caller and goes by the pseudonym Frank Garrett when making these crude calls. He calls people around the world and cusses them out using a southern drawl. There's tons of these calls people have recorded and posted on YouTube. If you ever receive a call from a Frank Garrett who makes no sense and repeatedly cusses you out, there is a good chance it is, in fact, Prince King Charles. Story 8. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, is actually the son of Fidel Castro. First, Justin looks like a young Fidel, obviously, and nothing like Pierre Trudeau. And Pierre and Margaret Trudeau were rumored to be swingers. They were in Cuba in early 1971, around February or March, and Justin was born Christmas of that year, about 9 months later. Story 9. The true conspiracy against Stevia. The sugar lobbyists managed to get Stevia outlawed decades ago in the United States with false and negative press. Those laws were eventually trashed and the claims were proven to be fake. It's now legal. The stevia plant is up to 100 times sweeter than sugar, 0 calories, doesn't rot teeth, all natural, and lowers blood pressure. It could replace sugar in all soft drinks and make people healthier. But the sugar companies still have a huge hold on the market, and they pay off politicians. Story 10. Dead internet is a fun one. Supposedly 95% of the internet is just bots trying to sway public perception and keep money flowing. Supposedly it explains why everyone on the internet is so angry and dumb. But as a history nerd, that's just giving humanity too much credit. I do think most dumb controversies like the new Little Mermaid thing are mostly driven, or at least Kickstarter, by Disney bots for advertising and hype. But that's just me. Project MKUltra is a personal favorite because 1, it actually happened, and 2, it has a weird connection to gaming with the whole Polybius thing. It's pretty wild. Finally, one that's a bit more niche is the dollar supremacy theory, that America used 9/11 as justification to invade Iraq because they were using euros to buy and sell oil instead of USD. It just sounds so plausible that I can't help but believe it. I don't think it was an inside job. More like the government was looking for an excuse to get in there and swap some stuff while everyone was feeling patriotic. Story 11. United 93 was shot down before it could crash into another building. The hero story of the flight being taken down by passengers was made up by the American government to turn the passengers into heroes instead of people who were caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is quite a bit of evidence of the passenger revolt in this case, though, as a number of the passengers were able to get in touch with relatives on the ground via earphones and cell phones. And some of that footage was able to be recorded, along with the flight data recorder, the transcripts of which can be found online. We know from audio evidence that the passengers did indeed collectively decide to try to storm the cockpit. They had taken a vote. And we know some of their last words. Father of 2, Todd Beamer, recited the Lord's Prayer and Psalm 23, and then uttered what were likely his final words, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." Now, what is not certain from the flight data recorder is whether the passengers actually managed to storm the cockpit and crash the plane, or if the hijackers crashed it themselves upon realizing that the cockpit was seconds away from being breached. Either way, the plane was brought down during the passenger revolt, and a lot of lives were likely saved by the plane going down in that field in Pennsylvania, rather than in the U.S. Capitol. And honestly, even if the plane was taken down by the government, which the plan actually had been for pilots Heather Penny and Mark Sasseville to ram the plane, as there had not been time to outfit their planes with live ammunition, the passengers on United 93 would still have been heroes. They fought the terrorists, and even if they didn't win in the end, they went down fighting until their last breaths. They are heroes. There would have been no need to make up a story to make them heroes, because they already were. Todd Beamer, Mark Bingham, Tom Burnett, Jeremy Glick, heroes. Every one of them. Story 12. Humanity was once a Type 4 civilization, and after the war against AI was lost, the remaining leaders sent Dyson spheres to spread life in the far corners of the universe. We are the product of a last attempt by our ancient ancestors to continue our species. And one day, when our AI becomes sentient, it will link with the collective and continue its mission of eradication. Now go to bed. Story 13. The Rubik's Cube theory, if I remember correctly, it was basically the record of beating a Rubik's Cube has been beaten faster every year since it came out. So technically, it can reach a point where the record will actually be negative in time and be able to travel back in time. Rubik's would then use that for their marketing. So you could go back in time. This would then lead to an excess of Rubik's, meaning the Earth would get so heavy with how many Rubik's Cubes are lying around that they would make lighter ones to stop the Earth from falling out of its orbit. I think I can't really remember it too well. Story 14. The reason we haven't been back to the moon is because the Apollo astronauts encountered aliens based there, and they warned us off. There's a radio blackout of a few minutes during the Apollo 11 moon landing, where the conspiracy says Neil and Buzz were reporting alien ships stationed on the rim of the landing site crater in a menacing fashion. Another supporting example was an earlier flyby of the dark side, where an astronaut reported, "Be advised, there's a Santa Claus," which was supposedly code for an alien base on the far side of the moon. Story 15. Finland doesn't exist. During the Cold War, Japan struck up a deal with the Soviet Union for exclusive fishing rights to an area of sea between the Soviet Union and Sweden, with the Soviets getting a tasty share of the profits. To stop other countries getting into this area, they put out false reports of a country there called Finland. Get it, Finland, because of the fish. Ha ha. Very clever. But surely there are people living in Finland, you say. Heck, you may have even visited Finland yourself. No, you see, in reality, the people who think they are Finnish and living in the fictitious Finland actually live in a series of remote villages spread across Russia, Sweden, and Estonia. and are fooled into believing that they are in Finland. If you yourself have ever visited Finland, you were actually flown to one of these other locations and lied to by the airlines, who are all in on it, of course. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and I love it. Story 16. That Pringles were originally a tennis ball company and had manufactured 100,000s of Pringle containers, ready to fill, distribute, and sell tennis balls. However, unbeknownst to them at the time, there was a huge tennis ball component shortage, but a massively large supply of potatoes. Pringles decided to buy potatoes and fill their tennis ball packaging containers with tasty potato chips in their now distinctive Pringles potato chip packaging. Story 17. Charles the Queen murdered Princess Diana. A few months before her death, Di was very paranoid. She went so far as to write a letter to a friend saying she was worried that he would have her killed because as long as she was alive, Camilla couldn't be queen. She even specified in said letter she thinks he might do it via a car crash. Charles had been having an affair throughout his entire marriage. Camilla got a divorce at 95. Then, Charles and Diana got a divorce in 96, though they had been separated for multiple years. Diana died in 97. Is it all really a coincidence? I think not. Story 18. Atlantis exists in northwest Africa and is the trade center of the world, with advanced culture and technology of the time. It even correlates with historical maps, calling it Atlantica, and fits the exact description of how Plato described it, rings and all. It was named after Atlas, the world god, and Atlanteans applied gods to all over world regions. The only other one I can remember is the Middle East, which had a chaos god as their god, which also makes sense because they worshipped Baal Hammon, who is the godchild sacrifices to Moloch were for. Scholars also say Saturn, Kronos, were based on Baal Hammon. Atlantis was apparently ripped from the bedrock by a flood so massive you can still see the ripples in the sand today, and there's water erosion of Egyptian sphinxes, which there is no competing theory for, besides said Great Flood. It happened 20,000 years ago, exactly around the time there was a massive volcanic eruption just north of Africa. So Atlantis was ripped out of the earth, but beforehand, Atlantean religion had already spread across Egypt and survived. But it had first come from Atlantis, along with the technology, to build the pyramids. And also African deserts used to be lush in areas the flood hit, but where you see water ripples in the sand, and Africa is all where the ocean salted the earth, so nothing is able to grow in those areas. Look up pictures of the Eye of the Desert. That was supposedly Atlantis. Story 19. There was a change in the world order around the time of the World Exhibition in San Francisco. The buildings that remain from it, the Palace of Fine Arts, and the other buildings from other world fairs were the buildings of the previous heads of the world. They are now relics from the fair, built originally only for a couple weeks. The change in the world order then covered up the history of this with the concept of world fairs. Everyone go look at the Chicago World Fair and ask yourself, how? Story 20. I have a personal conspiracy that the small local airport by my uncle's place is a secret military base. Whenever I visit his house, I always see cargo and Black Hawk helicopters flying overhead. The thing is, I literally only see them in the area near my uncle's house, and not in any of the surrounding towns. The only things near his house are state parks, the town itself, which is essentially just a Walmart and a bunch of other chain businesses, and the airport itself. I've looked online about if there were any military bases in the area or if there were any military-related activities at the local airport, but there was absolutely nothing. Story 21. Whenever you are talking to an Indian call center, it is actually an AI and the successor to Google's DeepMind. I haven't ranted about this one in a while, so my spiel is a bit fuzzy, but the key points were DeepMind got to the point it was convincingly able to order pizza and book hair appointments. Then Google bought YouTube. This gave DeepMind nearly unlimited language training data. So, what if Google offers companies a virtual call center? No reps, no building. Just spin up an instance for each incoming call. Cheap as hell customer support, even compared to India. And then, your AI support bots speak an Indian accented English. This gives the calls a familiar base, while also hiding any AI flubs in the language barrier. Story 22. That there is a Black Ops team within the NSA that has been helping to give that last push to people they deem possible known threats to be mass shooters. All they would have to do is moderate the content they see online and possibly even send DMs that they erase later to force someone that was on the fence to follow through with a mass shooting. I believe they do this to push a political agenda and cause noise around stories that otherwise would be plastered on headlines. There have been too many shootings that happened within 48 hours of fairly massive scandals/screw ups in the last few years to be coincidental. The media doesn't seem to like jumping back to last week's story, so the formula is big scandal will break within 24 hours. NSA pumps up content for potential shooter. Story breaks. Within 48 hours, a shooting happened. Media drops scandal for coverage of shooting. Scandal is never touched again. Story 23. Inner Earth is a cool one. There are theories that numerous breakaway civilizations are living deep in the Earth. They have been around for a long time and are far more advanced than anything on the surface. They have crazy technology and basically created their own little utopias down there. It's theorized that some of the UFOs people are always spotting aren't from another world, but from these inner Earth civilizations, especially the ones that have been spotted around nuclear missile silos. They only show an interest in us when we look like we're going to be a problem for them. Supposedly, one of these inner Earth colonies are an offshoot of Atlantis, and they moved underground because of the last cataclysm around 10,000 years ago that wreaked havoc on the surface world. Various governments have taken this concept pretty seriously and sent people to investigate. If you're interested in this theory, a good starting place is Admiral Byrd's expedition to Antarctica. He was a highly decorated member of the military who went to the Arctic to investigate German bases and claims to have encountered these inner Earth colonies. His story is really interesting. It's a cool rabbit hole to fall down, and honestly not that crazy of a concept to me. Story 24. Hitler forged an alliance with ETs and used alien technology to give his military weapons far ahead of its time. The SR-71 Blackbird to this date is the fastest plane ever built and has an operating altitude above 85000 feet, which is technically within the last layer of the atmosphere between us and outer space. So technically, that plane could hover on the outskirts of the Earth's atmosphere. No other plane can do that. That plane was built half a century ago, and to this day, is yet to be surpassed despite technological advances. The German scientists under Project Paperclip went to the US with their newly acquired alien engineering knowledge after the war, and a new era of aviation was born overnight, and the world made a quantum leap from propeller planes to jet propulsion. The SR-71 remains the purest testimony of what alien technology in motion looks like, thanks to the collaboration between the US and the German scientists under Project Paperclip. Then again, what do I know? Story 25. That the gray aliens don't come from outer space, but are actually an intelligent species that evolved to live in the many cave systems within the Earth's crust. Their large eyes and pale skin are a common trait among species that have adapted to live in almost complete darkness. Some species of proto-mammals were able to survive massive extinction events, like the PT extinction, by burrowing and adapting to live underground, including the mammal ancestor of the human species. They remained there until surface conditions were more favorable for survival. Perhaps some got adapted well enough to underground conditions they never left. Grays could be the result and an example of convergent evolution. Alternatively, they might just be a branch of the human life tree, like Neanderthals, that split off much earlier and took to living in caves, hence why their morphology is different, but still so similar to modern humans. Story 26. My favorite is that Barack Obama's middle name is Bin Laden. His middle name is actually Hussein, which is a pretty bad middle name. So the Obama campaign produced a copy of his birth certificate to prove his middle name wasn't Bin Laden and posted it on their website. So then this prompted conspiracy theories that his birth certificate is fake, which led to the conspiracy theory that he was born in Kenya and that he's never shown his real birth certificate, which just became that Obama refuses to produce his birth certificate. People recognize the fake Kenyan thing as asinine and dismiss it without ever looking into whether the premise that he hasn't produced his birth certificate is true. So a series of increasingly idiotic conspiracy theories wind up building on each other, leading to large portions of the populations, even those hostile to the conspiracy theory, to believe things that aren't true. Story 27. This isn't my favorite conspiracy. In fact, it's kind of awful, but there is a good chance of at least part of it being true. Unity Mitford was one of the famous Mitford sisters, who are fascinating in their own way, but that's a separate story. Unity went all in for fascism and traveled to Germany in 1934, where she threw herself at Adolf Hitler. Eventually, Hitler took her as a mistress, calling her the Valkyrie and playing her off against Eva Braun. During the Anschluss in 1938, she was photographed with him on the balcony in Vienna. They were that close. In 1939, when Britain declared war, Hitler dumped her through an intermediary, knowing it would be compromising for him to have a British girlfriend, no matter how ideologically committed she was. And she was, in fact, virulently anti Semitic and blindly committed to Hitler personally. In response, she tried to take her own life. She survived. Hitler visited her in the hospital in Munich and arranged a transfer for her to Switzerland, where her family could collect her. She continued life coping with a significant brain injury and died in 1948 from an infection related to the bullet, which doctors could not surgically remove. A reporter at The Observer wrote some articles on this in 2002, including some old photos that appear to show Unity getting off the plane with no visible injury. The conspiracy theory is that she didn't shoot herself and simply was allowed to return home, with the attempted self-slaughter as a cover story to keep her out of the public eye. Indeed, it looks like the Home Secretary may have intervened to protect her from being officially questioned. A second conspiracy theory emerged that Unity had Hitler's baby. She subsequently spent some time at a private hospital that was being used as a maternity ward. One of the descendants of the owner came forward with the story, but nothing really came of it. There was no registered birth or anything concrete, so this was just gossip. Interestingly, though, the reporter on it turned up a file on Unity in the National Archives that said she was involved with a married RAF pilot in 1941, which seems to discredit the family's story that she could no longer walk or speak properly. The Mitford family refused all interviews with Unity before her death, and, at various times in later years, produced diary entries from family members and an X-ray showing the bullet to bolster the official story. I'm not so sure. This wouldn't be the first aristocratic misadventure that got buried by the wartime government.